Hey guys, Mike here with Hardware Canucks, and I'm thinking that this is probably going to be one of the last videos we put out right before the Christmas holidays. So if you guys are watching this a couple days before Christmas or around Christmas, I wish you all Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, whatever it is you celebrate. Have a good one. But anyways, on to the subject of this video, and this actually all started with a single YouTube community post that I did. And some of you guys were guessing about what it could be. Is it a massive radiator bracket that I'm having 3D printed, or is it something else? And it is actually this something else. It isn't a massive radiator bracket. It is this little thing right here. This is a bracket that I 3D printed for this. This is actually my overkill ITX PC that I've been using for quite a while right now. You've probably seen it in a bunch of videos. But anyways, the idea is to increase the cooling for it. But at the same time, there's also some tradition that I wanted to talk about here, because you might not know this, but I am a huge Total War Warhammer fan, and my tradition is every single time a new game in that series comes out, I upgrade something in my PC. I might upgrade the whole PC or a couple of components. And well, as you can understand, it's probably also tradition that my girlfriend sees a credit card bill and she goes absolutely ballistic. So anyways, along with this bracket, that tradition is going to continue today. There's going to be a couple of upgrades made to this, and I want to talk about those components right now. First, I decided to move to Alder Lake, and look, don't worry, the outgoing motherboard and CPU are going to be repurposed into a pretty cool side project I've got planned, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, I looked down and found an i5 12600KF at a local Canada Computers. Why the KF versus the K, you might be wondering? Well, I won't be using the IGP for anything anyways, plus I was able to save a few bucks, so why not? Now I know you might also be wondering about my freaking sanity right now, since I'm shoving a supposedly power-hungry CPU into such a compact 7-liter case. But based on our review, the 12600K actually gobbles down a lot less power than you might expect it to when it's used in gaming. And what about the motherboard? Well, I'm gonna level with all of you guys, and a lot of you are probably in this exact same situation that I found myself in. I'm trying to buy as many of the components that I can locally, support my local retailers, and you guys should be doing the exact same thing. But finding a Z690 ITX board right now is quite the challenge. But I found this one. This is the ASRock Z690 Phantom Gaming ITX TB4. And this is all about densely packing as much power as possible into the smallest form factor possible without giving up a lot of the primary features that you would find on larger and even more expensive boards. But personally, I think the real highlight for me here is the future proofing I get for any upgrades I actually do down the road, especially since I use so much external storage at home. For example, it's got an I/O with more than enough connectors and a Thunderbolt 4 port that features PD 3.0 fast charging too. There's even an internal USB 3.2 Gen 2 header if I ever move to a case with a 20 gigabits per second front panel connector. Of course, Wi-Fi 6E support is here too, and it's nice in case I ever upgrade my home network sometime down the line. Also, I'm using my existing Gen 3 NVMe drive here, but there's also a free Gen 4 slot on the back if I ever need it. And memory, this was another tough one, but right now, since DDR5 is maturing so quickly, I decided to hedge my bets and grab what I could afford that was also in stock locally. It's a pretty basic 32 gigabyte kit of Corsair Vengeance DDR5. We've actually used these kits in the office quite a bit now, and I know they're flexible enough to run at tighter times and absolutely higher speeds than what Corsair ships them with. The final thing I ended up grabbing was a Noctua L9i 1700 along with the NA FD1. That FD1 acts as an airflow guide between the side of the case and the cooler. I actually covered it a few weeks ago, and the results were pretty impressive on this exact same case. So other than that, I'm bringing everything forward from my previous build. And look, I know a lot of folks here on YouTube end up building these ultra expensive high-end systems, even in the environment right now. But I'm going for a little bit more sensible approach because A, this is already a totally overkill system, even nowadays with the RTX 3090 and everything else that's in here. And also, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I've been playing with my own money. I think the real highlight about this video is this little fan bracket and the tiny fans I want to put on there to increase the airflow in here. So I'm gonna ask the camera guy to come in right now, and I'm gonna explain this to you a little bit more.
The Tower 100 by Thermaltake now comes in new colors, this racing green and turquoise, to add some fun into your next build with a full black interior so the exterior can shine with these fun colors, and the unique on-display layout to showcase your hardware. Check out the new Tower 100 down below.
Okay, with the cameraman in, let's talk about a little bit of the problem and how I tried to fix it with my little handy dandy 3D printed bracket over here. So on the Dr. Zaber Sentry, they have this area on the top here that's supposed to take care of outgoing airflow from your GPU. And right now it is a little bit restricted. So what I want to try and do is exhaust the air that might be trapped in there a little bit quicker. And luckily, what they have is this thing on the top of the GPU area. It's a secondary bracket that's supposed to reinforce the whole case. Now I was thinking to myself, look, how do I get fans onto here? Because the problem is there's absolutely nowhere to put them, and the heat generated from the GPU, basically it would cause a bunch of problems with any type of glue or tape I wanted to put on here. So we're gonna come back to this little bracket. And now before I go on, I wanted to mention, as I guess a little bit of a Christmas gift to anybody who is rocking this case, these files to 3D print are linked in the description below. First of all, what I needed to do is make it only 4 millimeters thick. That 4 millimeters allows these little fans, which are Noctua's handy dandy little 40 millimeter by 10 millimeter fans, to clear the GPU. So these things get mounted to the mounting holes with Noctua's included screws. The other thing I wanted to bring up here is something else that I did for added stability. Instead of screwing directly into the case, I wanted this to be sort of self-sufficient. So I put in 12 millimeter by 2 millimeter magnets in some strategic locations. I'm gonna leave a link to those in the description below too. So how does this thing get mounted? What I did here is added 2 little notches in order for it to go around some screw placements within the Dr. Zaber bracket. So if I just pop it in here, like so, you're gonna hear the magnet sort of click into place and bring it in. This thing is installed, and I'll give it a good yank. It's absolutely not going anywhere. The next step that I wanted to talk to you guys about is exactly mounting these and the final clearance. So I'm gonna start mounting all of these fans here and get right back to you. All right, so here we are with 4 of the A4 by 10 fans installed. I want to talk about a couple of things here that I did. First of all, these are installed, like I said, with the included mounting screws. Those metal mounting screws had a very, very good chance of vibrating up against the actual case itself. So what has happened here is I've slightly recessed these, I don't know if you can see it on camera, into this whole frame. They are not touching anything, no vibrations at all. But let's talk about installation, because this is going to be a little bit of a cable routing nightmare. Now, with this installed like this, you'll actually be able to see what the clearances are and how tight we are. So if you have a wider GPU and you wanted to 3D print this bracket to put these fans on here, just take this into account. You might need to go with something a little bit slimmer actually than 10 millimeters. But you can actually see with these power connectors, they would actually hit those fans. So if you have a shorter GPU that has a rear mounted connector, you're not gonna have absolutely any trouble populating every single one of these fan slots. So what I wanted to do now is I'm gonna build this thing and then hop back on camera, talk about the experience, talk about what kind of temperatures I'm able to get with this, and a little bit of performance. Well, here we are on day 2 and the build is done. I'm so happy with the way it turned out, but that doesn't mean it didn't come with a couple of challenges. First and foremost is just the cable management. You probably saw me struggling with that in the montage from a couple of seconds ago. Let me explain exactly what happened. First of all, this is a case that's already quite the challenge to properly cable manage. There's just not all that much space between the components, and there's very little flexibility. I'm also using a Silverstone power supply in there that has some of the stiffest cables you'll ever come across. Now adding a 3-to-1 fan adapter, a couple of fan extension cables and whatnot, that is really where the challenges lied, especially taking those cables underneath the fans and creating sort of like a small channel between the metal bracket and the fans so they don't basically munch their own cables. Other than that, there's another big challenge that I came across when putting my usual full core stress load on the CPU, and that is the fact that the L9i 1700 just simply isn't made to handle the Alder Lake 12600K in its stock form without thermal throttling. And I'll give Noctua some credit here because they actually put that in the documentation. This cooler with that chip is meant to ride right up against the thermal limits of the CPU. I wasn't too happy about that, especially the fact that when I was gaming, it wasn't hitting thermal limits. It was hitting around 90 degrees or so, but that was a little bit too high for me. So I ended up undervolting by about 0.01 volts, and I also capped the overall power limit to 100 watts. But there was actually two primary purposes for this build. First of all was, of course, to test out that fan bracket, see how it performed, and the other one was for gaming. So let's talk about those gaming results versus what the old system used to do. I am so happy with what the 12600KF delivered. Even with it set to 100 watts and undervolted, it ended up running circles around that older setup while gaming at my usual 1440p. And that cutback from the stock CPU, well, you're really not giving up all that much, are you? As a matter of fact, frame rates were basically the same right across the board. And what about cooling? Well, this is where things get even more interesting. Before the fan mod, the GPU was sitting at around 83 degrees in Warhammer 2 and clocked in at around 1755 megahertz. But pop those 4 fans on there and the temperatures dipped to 81 Celsius and clock speeds ended up being a bit higher too. But the big news here was the noise. The RTX 3090's fans went from just north of 2400 RPM to just under 2200 RPM. And that makes a huge difference. How much? Well, check this out, guys. The system without 4 Noctua fans hit about 43 decibels, which isn't quiet, but it's not specifically loud either. But with them installed, it's only around 39 decibels from about 3 feet away, and that is so much more manageable. 4 decibels might not sound like much, but it's a whole lot when the system is sitting right next to you. And believe it or not, there were some challenges with those tiny Noctua fans too that I found. Basically, what ended up happening is that if they were running too fast, they ended up just being too noisy. They were noisier than the GPU, but run them too slow, and there was actually turbulence caused between the outgoing airflow from the GPU and the fan blades themselves, so it sounded like a muted hum. What I ended up having to do is tune those fans to run at a constant RPM level and basically match their outgoing airflow with what the GPU was pushing. It ended up being, for me at least, just installing the Noctua LNA or low noise adapters fixed that perfectly. And you might have noticed something else in those numbers. With the new fan installed, the CPU temperatures were a bit lower too while gaming, and I really couldn't figure out why, but I'm thinking it's because there's a little bit less hot air running around the system, mucking things up like a bunch of gremlins. But that's just a theory. Either way, I'm gonna chalk this up as a win in my books. Well, I guess that brings me to the end of this specific journey, and I hope that you enjoyed this as much as I did in creating it, because I set out to do 2 things. First of all, was increase the overall performance of my system with my usual system update that I do every single time a new Warhammer game launches. And that system update, it accomplished exactly what it set out to do. It increased the performance in the games that I play the most without having to swap out the GPU or spend an absolute fortune. The other thing was that tiny little fan mod, and it works so well. I'm so excited now to do so many other 3D printed projects. I've got some ideas for coolers, for other cases, things that will come in handy for the community, for you guys. And if you have any ideas of things that you might want that might be going through a 3D printer or just hacked together, I'm more than willing to give it a shot. So with that in mind, I'm gonna sign off. I hope you guys have a great holiday season. I'm Mike with Hardware Canucks, and I'll see you in the next one.